Some people call it ugly, some call it a clown shoe. I just call it the Viberg 310. From first glance, people's reactions make total sense. Most folks aren't used to seeing a boot shaped like this wide, chunky thing with a sprung toe that seemingly defies gravity, and a stance that's equal parts defiant and deliberate. But those same skeptics don't realize that almost every service boot in the modern heritage scene, from high-end makers to upstarts, owes something profound to the Viberg 310. This isn't just a boot, it's the origin story of an entire aesthetic revolution in footwear. To understand why, we have to go back to the roots. Viberg Boot Company was founded in 1931 by Edwin Viberg in Saskatchewan, Canada. Picture this, the Great Depression is raging, and Edwin's crafting practical ankle boots for farmers based on a shared military pattern, which was used across American, Canadian, Japanese, and even Australian forces. These early boots featured a one-piece backstay and counter, simple quarters, and a vamp designed for widespread wearability. By the late 1940s, the operation had moved to Prince George, British Columbia, where it specialized in logging boots. Think heavy-duty spikes that could be replaced on-site, built for the brutal demands of the timber industry. For decades, the lineup was purely utilitarian. These workhorses were made for farmers, loggers, mechanics, and anyone who needed footwear that could take relentless abuse. Functional? Absolutely. Glamorous? Not a chance. Fast forward to the early 2000s and enter Brett Viberg, Edwin's grandson. At the time, Brett wasn't the owner or CEO, that was his father Glenn, but he was the creative director, the soon-to-be visionary pushing boundaries. Viberg was still knee-deep in industrial production, but Brett's eyes were wandering beyond Canada's borders. Japan had exploded as the epicenter of the heritage revival movement some decades prior. Brands like Red Wing Japan and the Osaka 5 weren't just copying American workwear, they were reimagining it with obsessive, almost reverent detail. Premium materials, precise stitching, and cultural depth that treated denim and boots like artifacts. To Japanese collectors, workwear wasn't mere clothing, it was a living piece of Americana culture, faded and worn to perfection. Viberg's gateway into this world came via Nepenthes, the influential Japanese brand that later birthed engineered garments. Nepenthes approached Viberg to tweak the Bobcat boot for their market, which sparked a years-long collaboration and opened Brett's eyes to new possibilities in Asia. Through this partnership, Brett started traveling to Japan more frequently, immersing himself in the scene, meeting retailers, chatting with enthusiasts, and dissecting why certain proportions, like a generous toe box or a dominating silhouette, resonated so deeply across the Pacific. And then, by chance, something caught his eye back in Canada. As Brett put it on his StitchDown.com interview, "Looking through a bunch of boxes in our office, I found a picture of our original service boot, which made the light bulb go off with what we had all along." This Japanese influence directly birthed early experiments, the 245 last for instance, and later the short shift, both bridging the gap between rugged workwear boot DNA and a more refined lifestyle-oriented shape. But Brett wasn't satisfied. He craved something bolder, a boot that channeled the Japanese fascination with American heritage, but filtered through a fresh, experimental lens. In his mind, the answer crystallized as the 310. Brett's talked about this genesis in multiple interviews, on the Full Grain podcast, the Shoecast, and beyond. The 310 was a true hybrid, drawing from diverse sources. The bump-toe profile of the Toughie boot from fellow Canadian company Dayton, and the anatomical ergonomic width of the Munson military last from the early 20th century US designs. Brett described it vividly as, "It was a Frankenstein of putting lasts together and hoping it turns out okay." He started by looking at the existing British springline last and came across one with a wildly sprung toe, and then merging that with his inspirations, created a deliberate design blending Canadian industrial utility with military ergonomics from a bygone era. The outcome? A wide, rounded service boot with a toe that lifts dramatically off the ground, a visually heavy, grounded stance, and a fit that has become widely yearned for, but rare in existence. A combination last described as a narrow heel and wide in the forefoot for all-day comfort. It's functional at its core, echoing those early 20th century military boots where high toe volume was about accommodating thick socks and movement. And it's really not just about aesthetics, because the boot made your walking stride much more efficient. And though not a direct copy of a boot from 100 years ago, it doesn't reject heritage. It amplifies it, exaggerating proportions to make a statement. Brett once said to Ben Robinson about the boot, "They get attention. People who appreciate footwear will say, 'What the heck are those?'" The very first 310 wasn't a polished production sample. It was Brett's personal prototype, hammered together around 2008 or 2009. The heel stack was too low for the aggressive toe spring, throwing it a bit off balance, but he laced them up anyways. Why? Because like any passionate creative director, he was designing for himself first. At that pivotal moment in Japan during the mid-2000s, where Red Wing was developing the Iron Ranger, the 310 embodied what he envisioned, the raw essence of Canadian work style reinterpreted through the discerning gaze of a Japanese heritage collector. Though originally nailed in construction, the 310 evolved to a double row stitch down one instead, and the mainstream fashion world didn't quite take to it immediately, which may have contributed to its early falters in the Japanese market. But with Brett being relentless about details and his ever-evolving take on what is best for his brand, the stitch-down gave Viberg a chance to elevate boots beyond the rest of the pack. Though the rugged construction was prevalent in his Pacific Northwest bootmaker compatriots, he was aiming to refine that to a point that made it difficult for his competitors to follow, but it would take years for his vision to come to fruition. When the 310 finally hit Japan around late 2009, it wasn't an instant smash. Viberg's entrenched industrial image was too dominant. Even this innovative boot couldn't fully shake it. Small runs went to shops in Japan, Hong Kong, and Taiwan, but the broader adoption, it lagged. If you were to dig through the resale sites like Second Street, Treasure Factory, or Mercari today, you'll uncover plenty of those Nepenthes area Vibergs, collaborative Bobcats and short shifts in the 245 Oxfords that first lured Brett eastward. But the modern icons? Scarce. No flood of 2030s, 2040s, or even 310s themselves. And that tells a story. You'll spot everything from Red Wings to Russell moccasins, Edward Greens to para boots, but Viberg remains niche. In Japan, the brand never fully transcended its work boot roots, a perception that might be etched too deep to erase, even now. Yet in the West, the 310 ignited a transformation. While it fizzled in Japan, it planted the seeds for Viberg's modern design language. Brett quickly realized the 310, with its chunky profile, wasn't the everyday flagship the company craved. It was too bold for slim-fit trends in the post-recession era, but it was the blueprint for what would come next, the 2030 last. If the 310 was the wild experiment, the 2030 was a polished refinement, sleeker with a tapered almond toe, lower profile, and eventually universal appeal. Brett crafted it from a Canadian military uniform last, stripping the bump, thinning the form, and then reducing the toe box depth for elegance. The 310 endured, though, staying in production not for blockbuster sales, but for its symbolic weight. It's Viberg's design anchor, perched at the spectrum's extreme edge, the outlier that grants permission for everything else to thrive. Because the 310 exists, so do the 2040, the 2045, and of course, the 2030. It balances the heritage boot world, reminding designers of the boundary where bold meets bizarre. Without that edge, the middle ground blurs into sameness. Because of this boot, we avoided what could have been a dark age in men's footwear. Its ripple effects extend far beyond Viberg. The 2030 became the archetype for the modern service boot, universally. That seamless fusion of rugged utility and refined wearability, a military silhouette rebooted for daily life. Now it's the industry's benchmark. Spotted in Thursday's Captain or countless imitators that followed, they're not hiding it. Once the 2030 launch, brands clamor for their spin on that sleek workwear dress hybrid, which Viberg nailed. Brett reflected on the copies. I spent a lot of years upset about it, and eventually I said, I can keep being upset about it, or I can focus in and build my business. You can only look at it as a source of inspiration. The 310 defines the fringe of the design spectrum where boots teeter on unwearable yet captivate. That's its genius. It empowers every other boot to straddle function and fashion. Think of Packard boots from the Pacific Northwest, Monkey boots in Britain. Philosophically, it's akin to a concept car in the automobile world, not built for mass appeal, but to showcase possibility, anchor identity, and prove innovation lives. Automakers roll out wild prototypes to scream, "We're dreamers." The 310 does that for Viberg, a nearly century-old company evolving from logging spikes to icons. Buy a 2030 and you're tethered to the 310 spirit, just as a production sedan nods to its radical concept car forebearer. That link is aspirational. It signals the brand's depth. For Viberg, the 310 cements identity. For collectors, it's the pinnacle. The boot you chase after amassing grails, shell cordovans, and made-to-measures, ready for the bleeding edge of service boot potential. Concept cars don't generate profit, but they can define the maker's message, like, we're not stagnant, we're pushing. The 310 embodies that ethos. It's not for all. Even Viberg fans claim its divisiveness, but it's respected. Without it, is there a Viberg as we know it? The 310 isn't a flop. It's a constant proof of concept, the linchpin of Viberg's language, a subtle nod to the Victoria-based work boots outfit's global ascent. Whether you own one or not, lacing up any modern service boot channels its legacy. The 310 walked, so every other boot could run.